Alien, human, or demon? Skeletor is one of those mysterious esoteric villains in the He-Man universe who has popped up as a threat in the most unexpected circumstances. And while we know plenty about his evil schemes, there's still much we don't know about his origins or family relations. From his initial introduction as an interdimensional being to later depictions as demonic, most fans settled on his image as the long-lost relative of He-Man. Yes, you heard it right. Skeletor's most popular origin takes him back to being Hordak's student and identifies him as Keldor. And today, I will be taking you through his origin story and explaining his entire family tree once and for all. Was Skeletor originally an alien or a human? From the very start, the original Masters of the Universe toy line introduced Skeletor as a villain who was in no way linked to the royal family. In fact, Donald F. Glutt's writing and Alfredo Alcala's illustrations portrayed him as an interdimensional warlord when he first launched, among other Mattel figures. The original story went something like this. A dimensional wall cracked open during the Great Wars, and the rift left enough space for Skeletor to squeeze his way out of there and land on Eternia. While he isn't originally an Eternian, he arrives from this parallel world with the intention of gaining both halves of the Power Sword and using them to march his way to Castle Grayskull. That's all. That's the simple original story that has stuck with fans for a long time. And while the uncle reveal has now been the standard story for years, the interdimensional version is Skeletor's original history. Now, obviously, these two contrasting versions have a lot of tension between them, but before we complicate any of this, Skeletor was originally a cosmic invader who landed in a post-apocalyptic world, where He-Man was also nothing more than a wandering barbarian. And if you think that this origin raises some eyebrows, let me take you through Michael Halpern's Masters of the Universe Bible, which established Skeletor's home dimension as Infinita. According to this, Skeletor was a demon who had arrived from an evil dimension that existed as a dark counterpart to Eternia. However, a dimensional rift eventually unleashed him upon Eternia, where he did not take long to grow power-hungry. What does the 1983 Filmation cartoon add to Skeletor's origin? If a demonic presence was not enough of a threat, the 1983 Filmation animated series went ahead and kept his identity under wraps, only to eventually reveal him to be Hordak's former pupil. This all started out with the original animation Skeletor coming across as a mysterious antagonist who is evil, but with no justification for his nature or any explanation behind his turning out to be the menace that he is. However, by 1985, their original series expanded through the theatrical film He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword, which is where they finally dropped the second shoe. While Skeletor continued to be known as a demonic entity with a growing army at Snake Mountain, we eventually learned that his first romance with evil was when he was affiliated with Hordak's evil horde. During this time, he even ended up becoming the monster's favorite pupil and followed him into an invasion. When Hordak tried to kidnap Randor's twin children, Adam and Adora, the attempt ended with Hordak escaping with Adora and leaving Skeletor behind on Eternia. Skeletor eventually took it upon himself to build a base at Snake Mountain. Even though Hordak had abandoned Skeletor on Eternia, our mighty villain took this as an opportunity to conquer this foreign world and even rule from Castle Grayskull. Hordak, being Skeletor's mentor and eventually betraying his favorite student, became the seed that sprouted one of his most widespread origins, and this detail has lived on and even inspired many later releases, such as the 2002 show Masters of the Universe Classics and even Revolution. What first hinted that Skeletor is He-Man's uncle? Now that the creators have explored his origins as a demon or as a former member of the Evil Horde, Stephen Grant and Bruce Timm's 1987 mini-comic The Search for Keldor put a whole new story into the limelight. Now, Skeletor was not just any evil being who had stumbled upon Eternia, but was potentially an isolated member of the royal family. We all know about King Randor having a brother, but it was this comic that first hinted at Skeletor's possible identity as Keldor, Randor's brother, who had disappeared ages ago after magical experiments went wrong. While he landed in a dimension beyond time, King Randor allied with the sorceress to find out what had happened to his brother at an auspicious time when the veil between dimensions weakened once a year. While the sorceress led this endeavor, we learned that Skeletor was on the other side of this veil, panicking about them learning the secret of Keldor and how that would potentially destroy him. Moreover, he even puts in efforts to stop Randor by summoning Scareglow, Ninjor, Faker, and Blast Attack to distract the heroes, all while muttering that they must never discover the secret of Keldor and how it could destroy him. At the end of it all, He-Man does manage to thwart Skeletor's schemes, but alas, it all happens a little too late, and Skeletor sighs in relief as the auspicious moment passes. With another year gained, Skeletor's concerns about Keldor's secret being uncovered fade away, while Randor makes his peace with the fact that they have a long wait ahead. However, writer Stephen Grant later confirmed that Keldor was intended to be Skeletor and that they were going for a Darth Vader thing, turning this comic into a landmark moment that hinted at Skeletor's true identity as He-Man's long-lost uncle. What does the 1987 live-action film do with Skeletor's origin? Around the same time that we first wrapped our heads around Skeletor potentially being Keldor, the 1987 Masters of the Universe film took a different route, with Frank Langella portraying Skeletor. This version was a twisted cosmic villain, and Langella's dedication towards painting Skeletor as a mighty, scary entity paid off when fans started taking the character more seriously. This film followed Skeletor as he captured Castle Grayskull, absorbed the power of the Great Eye, and briefly attained godlike power before being defeated by He-Man. And this film definitely brought a lot more gravitas to this character. After all, a skull-faced godlike entity demanded our attention, and this version eventually went on to inspire many later reboots as well. What stood out was just how the film worked with his frightening personality, while not attaching itself to any of the origins that first brought him into the limelight. And Langella truly elevated this character beyond the script's requirements. What happens to Skeletor in the New Adventures of He-Man, 1990 through 91? Soon after, we witnessed a less elevated version of Skeletor in the New Adventures of He-Man, wherein Mattel did not do much to expand his family tree or even explain how it all connected. Instead, the story followed Skeletor as he followed He-Man into the future. And while this version had some striking cybernetic enhancements and tech-based powers, he never amounted to much. The story left behind many loose threads about his relationship with He-Man, his possible past existence as Keldor, and his ties to the royal family. And by the end of it, he had disappeared into the vast nothingness of space in a shuttle pod. How does the 2002 reboot confirm Keldor on screen? To reel things back in, the 2002 Mike Young Productions reboot of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe finally broke the silence and confirmed Skeldor's identity as Keldor once and for all. This started off in the show's very first episode, which opened with a flashback where Keldor advises his evil warriors as they attack the Hall of Wisdom. While the series itself did not initially state that King Randor and Keldor were brothers, the episode begins with Randor warning the Council of Elders about Keldor's incoming attack. As things spiral out of control, the Elders declare that Randor will soon rule Eternia as king and replace them, while Keldor would also taste defeat. Much to no one's surprise, their predictions turn into reality as they themselves vanish while Keldor faces Randor and aims at him with a corrosive liquid in his hand. Unfortunately for him, the planned acid attack results in his own downfall, as Randor deflects it with his shield, while Keldor's face bears the brunt of it all. In the aftermath of it, Keldor disappears into the Dark Hemisphere with his forces, and while we all know that it was this acid attack that disfigured his face and led to his transformation into Skeletor, the actual transformation was not covered until the first season's 10th episode. In The Price of Deceit, we finally see everything that happened after Keldor's face was drenched in acid. Right from Evil Lyn rushing him to Hordak's sanctuary, to Keldor begging him to save his life at any cost. Now, Hordak is not someone who would just hand out any favors, and while he could have saved him in better ways, he chose to strip away Keldor's damaged flesh. What was left behind was a floating skeletal head, and Hordak transformed him into Skeletor while the man behind the face, Keldor, seemingly lost his hold on reality after witnessing his new form. This is the moment that marked his descent into insanity, aka his rebirth as Skeletor. But it is interesting to know that the show never officially linked him to Randor. In fact, it was only through supplementary DVD material and comments from producer Ian Richter that we received confirmation that Keldor and Randor were intended to be half-brothers who shared a father but had different mothers. Richter also talked about how the show would have delved deeper into their family tree had it been greenlit for a third season. Unfortunately, no such season ever materialized, and fans connected the royal family tree's branches on their own. What is the full family tree in Masters of the Universe Classics canon? When Mattel produced the Masters of the Universe Classics toy line around 2008, brand manager Scott Neatlich took it upon himself to craft Skeletor's family tree and set the record straight once and for all. In this endeavor, he even reconciled many past storylines into Classics canon and rewrote them across character biographies and mini-comics produced in collaboration with DC Comics. The story first established Keldor as Eternia's King Miro's firstborn son, who was conceived with Saren, a woman hailing from the humanoid blue-skinned race known as the Gar. Now, the Gar were known for enduring a history of prejudice inflicted upon them by Eternians, and when King Miro had a second son, Randor, it did not take long for Keldor to be shunned due to his half-Gar origins. Moreover, King Miro also started grooming Randor to take over the throne, all while Keldor was banished from the palace and left alone to wander as an outcast. It was at this point that he stumbled upon Hordak's spirit and threw himself into the study of the dark arts, an act that pivoted him into creating an army to fight against Captain Randor. Unfortunately, the fight took everything out of him and left him with no choice but to return to Hordak for help. And this is the point where Classics canon pivoted from past stories. In this timeline, Keldor promised to free Hordak from Despondos in exchange for saving his life. But he could not honor this promise after all. Naturally, Hordak did not take kindly to this, and as his own form of justice, he revived Keldor through the most unnatural means by merging him with an evil extra-dimensional monster, Demo Man. Now, the original fans remember Demo Man as a working concept name associated with Skeletor during Mattel's earliest story developments, and this classic storyline paid tribute to it in the most innovative way possible. By quite literally merging Keldor with Demo Man, this story birthed Skeletor, the Lord of Destruction, whose very first act was driving his own host Keldor into insanity. Moreover, this story also revealed that Keldor had secretly married Evil Lyn, aka Evelyn Morgan Powers, and even had a son with her. But unfortunately, his transformation into Skeletor came with him losing all emotional attachment to his family. While Evil Lyn was distraught, she dealt with this by sending their son into the future for his own safety. But alas, the kid was also destined for many adventures, as documented in the 2014 mini-comic The Fall of Eternia, Homecoming. Now, this was all about the story, but as promised, this video wouldn't live up to its expectations if I did not break down the entire Skeletor family tree. To start it off, we have King Devon Grayskull, an ancient ruler connected to the royal legacy of Grayskull, while King Miro later ruled Eternia as part of the royal line. While Miro had a couple of relationships, Saren was a Gar woman who gave him a son, Keldor. Now, for the purpose of this breakdown, let's refer to Prince Keldor as Skeletor. While he was being shunned for his half-Gar origins, Keldor's father, King Miro, had another child with another woman, and this child is known to be Randor, his half-brother. Additionally, the Classics canon also named Stefan and another unnamed daughter as Skeletor's half-siblings, but for the most part, we only see his intense interactions with the half-brother who took his claim to the throne, Randor. As time passed, Randor settled down with Queen Marlena, who is technically Skeletor's half-sister-in-law, and the couple had 2 children, Adam and Adora. Also known as He-Man and She-Ra respectively, Adam and Adora are Skeletor's half-nephew and half-niece respectively. In the meantime, it should be also noted that before turning into Skeletor, Keldor secretly married Evil Lyn and had a son, Skele-Teen, who was sent off to the distant future for his own safety. Through this act, Skeletor had a son, a secret wife, and the mighty Faceless One as his father-in-law. And I'd personally love to see a spin-off where our evil villain steps into these family roles. What did the DC Comics run add? In the aftermath of Classics, DC Comics also relaunched the Masters of the Universe comic line, beginning with a digital first release written by Jeff Johns and illustrated by Howard Porter and John Livesey. This comic was one of the first modern mainstream storylines to directly establish He-Man's relation to Skeletor, and it was soon followed by another 6-issue miniseries that followed Skeletor's success at invading Castle Grayskull while failing to unleash its power. This was only the start of his story, as the plot unraveled with He-Man defeating him and banishing him to another part of the world, where he learned that Hordak had been manipulating him all along. The next volume of the comic followed the hero's attempts at bringing the sorceress back to life amid attacks by Hordak's army, which all shaped up to be a prelude to He-Man: The Eternity War. Interestingly, it was this 15-issue long story that really went into all the details of Keldor's half-Gar parentage, right from his father falling for a Gar woman to the subsequent prejudice that Keldor had to endure in his formative years. The Eternity War also cemented the idea that had first been established in classics and confirmed that Keldor lost out on his claim to the throne because of his Gar lineage, while Randor's full Eternian heritage made him acceptable as heir, even though he was not the eldest son. What does Masters of the Universe Revelation do with Skeletor's origin? On the other hand, Kevin Smith's parallel Netflix show, Masters of the Universe Revelation, was presented as a spiritual sequel to the Filmation show and initially continued with the same story, in which Skeletor appeared to be an interdimensional demon. This version of Skeletor initially had no confirmed ties to the royal family or double identity as Keldor in the television series. Revelation also released in collaboration with Dark Horse Comics' prequel comic run, which doubled down on the demon mythology and painted Skeletor as an entity with an entire family back in his home realm. Now, this deviated greatly from the Keldor connection that everyone had accepted as Skeletor's true identity, but that's exactly what made Revelation stand out, as its prequel comic placed him as a being from the realm of Apollos. This story eventually depicted him as Skele-God after he emerged victorious and claimed the Sword of Power and the power of Grayskull. But again, this was a short-lived glimpse into his godlike form before Revolution returned to the Keldor origin and revealed that his belief in the Apollos story had been part of Hordak's manipulation. How does Revolution finally close the decades-long loop? Often voted as one of the best depictions of Skeletor, Masters of the Universe Revolution was released in 2024 and immediately caught the fans' attention by casting William Shatner as Keldor and Mark Hamill as Skeletor. This marketing hook was one of the major attractions of the show, and while this 5-episode series serves as a sequel to Revelation, it takes a leap by steering away from Skeletor's supposed demonic origins and introducing him as Keldor instead. In fact, it was the first release connected to the Filmation-inspired continuity to formally link the two characters, and the story takes its time to develop this origin and establish the link between Skeletor and He-Man. The story follows Skeletor as he turns into a machine magic hybrid after being infected with a technological virus, and while you could probably guess who was behind all this, I'll save you the trouble and confirm that it was Hordak. Corrupted by this virus, Skeletor, or Skeletech, grows increasingly obsessed with his Keldor identity and even reclaims it in a desperate attempt to sit on the throne of Eternia. These moments are a delight to witness as William Shatner voices Keldor and confirms Skeletor's link to the royal family in a dramatic moment, when Hordak confirms this by revealing that Keldor had been exiled from Eternia when they first met. As time passed, Keldor trained under Hordak, and even accepted the Havoc staff at the cost of the flesh on his face, which is when he transformed into Skeletor. Under this master villain's control, Keldor soon started losing his memories and became a shell of his former self, or rather, a puppet stripped of his true identity. Eventually, it is He-Man who frees his long-lost uncle from the evil influence controlling him and allows Keldor's identity to re-emerge. While he temporarily sheds his Skeletor identity, Keldor finds himself relieved when he realizes that he is no longer anyone's puppet, making this tale a proper payoff to a story that had been running around our minds for decades. We had all gotten so used to seeing Skeletor as a twisted entity that we never paused to see the man underneath, and Revolution finally closed this decades-long loop. To add to this, William Shatner as Keldor with Mark Hamill playing Skeletor is just the cherry on top, and who would have thought that we would finally see Keldor regaining his humanity in such a crossover-worthy moment? Does Skeletor have a son? The story of Skele-Teen. Now that I've taken you through almost every version of Skeletor's family tree and origins imaginable, I know you're still wondering whether I'd circle back to his kid. So there you have it. Skeletor did have a secret son with Evil-Lyn in Masters of the Universe Classics canon. However, this child came into being when Skeletor was Keldor. To protect this child from harm, Evil-Lyn ended up sending him to the distant future, and Skele-Teen first appeared in the 2014 Classics minicomic The Fall of Eternia Part 1, Homecoming. This is the story where Skele-Teen first vows revenge against Hero II, thereby following in his own father's evil footsteps and taking the family war to the next generation. And on that note, I believe we have come to the end of our deep dive into Skeletor's origins and family tree, be it from the point of view of an extra-dimensional demon, a devoted member of Hordak's army, or a royal-turned-fallen villain. From his demonic versions to storylines where Keldor eventually turned into Skeletor, every single story tied to this villain has managed to keep me in utter awe. However, I could not help but pick a few favorites, such as Masters of the Universe Classics or Revolution, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them in the comments below.